How did you get into the adult entertainment business?
Well, let's see. It was about 4 years ago, and I was working in retail. I've been working in retail for about 10 years, and good enough job. I have good things to say about the company I worked with, but it wasn't really where I wanted to be. And at the time, I guess you could say I was in a bit of a transitional period. And my boyfriend he ran an adult business where he sold like BDSM themed sex toys, and he got to travel a lot around the country. And so I was talking to him about, I'm just tired of my job. I kind of want to get out of this town. And he said, well, what if you, and we were having a long distance relationship, and he suggested to me, he said, well, what if you came up to live with me and you helped me run my business and you travel with me? And I was like, well, that's quite an offer. That's a little bit to unpack. But once again, if I did do this, I'd still have to have some sort of supplemental income on the side. So I'm like, well, what can I do that I can just kind of do from anywhere? I don't think that most department stores are going to be cool with me. Like, well, I'm heading out to Vegas for 2 weeks. Ciao, whenever I felt like it. And I'd had a friend that had been doing webcams for about 5 years, and she really loved it. She had a very successful business with it. And so I observed what she did and thought to myself, well, what if I did something like that? Because I could do it from, well, anywhere, as long as I had a laptop and a webcam and a decent light source, I could potentially broadcast from wherever I wanted. So I presented this to my boyfriend. I said, what if I do this? What if I became a webcam model? And he said, it's not an easy job, but if you want to do it, I support you 100%. So when I came to live with him, I abandoned retail and threw myself into trying to make it in webcams. At first it was not easy, and it's still not easy, but it's a difficulty that I can handle now a little bit better. And from doing webcam work, I started shooting with other companies. I started shooting my own content. I went on to doing phone sex, and now I just kind of do an amalgam of phone sex, webcam work, shooting for other companies, and doing my own shooting. And 4 years later, here I am. And I love it, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Is there still a social stigma that goes along with this line of work?
Less than there used to be, I think, but absolutely, there is a social stigma. The topic of sex and sexuality in general, I think, is uncomfortable for a lot of people. I do think that they get very awkward about it. There is stigmas about hygiene, as far as there's always people think that people in the industry have a lot of STDs, but really people in the industry get tested rather often. In fact, if you want to be shooting more like hardcore content regularly, you need to be tested every 2 weeks. So, and since all of them are working with each other, there's not much chance of any sort of STDs breaking out. It's been, it's very contained in the off chance that it ever does happen. So there is, and just the general stigma of you're selling your body. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not. I get to take it home at the end of the night. What are you talking about? I'm not selling anything, if nothing, more or less what I'm selling is a character, a fantasy, a story for people that they like and they enjoy. So, yes, there is a social stigma, and most of my friends that are outside of the industry are very accepting and understanding, but there is still kind of an awkwardness there too. They're afraid sometimes to ask me questions, and I'm like, well, okay, you answer phones all day at a call center. Well, that's kind of what I do too, but our technical problems are solved very different ways. So, there is those stigmas. People don't always want to ask you questions. You can't always, if people, when you're out at your hairdresser or, out at the grocery store and you strike up a conversation with someone, you probably don't want to bring up the fact that you do sex work. Not because you really, I certainly don't feel ashamed of it, but sometimes it makes other people uncomfortable. And sometimes you're just not in the mood to have that conversation. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have all those questions that come with it. But, most importantly, you just don't want to make other people uncomfortable or surrounding people. So you sometimes have to tread very lightly in talking about it, where other people might not. Like if you work at a pharmacy or if you work at a department store, you're not going to probably think twice about telling people what you do for a living. But there is a certain stigma about what I do in a number of different ways.
To pry with some of those questions you probably don't like answering all the time or in excess. What type of fetishes do you feel are too far, or something that just kind of like borders on that line? You don't really want to do it, even though if somebody's like, "Can you shoot this for me?"
Well, let's see. I mean, now I'm going to be honest, I do some really weird stuff. Like I kind of specialize in doing like the weirder the better. So, I mean, it's not really necessarily a matter of what's too weird for me. It may be a matter of like, well, cost investment, time investment. For example, there's one fetish that's called wet and messy. And basically, to describe it, it's you see models getting pied in the face with food, literal pies. And it could be anything from like, shaving cream to whipped cream to pudding to a strawberry pie. And it's just girls getting covered in food. It may not just be food. It sometimes could be like sort of like Nickelodeon type slime. And it's girls just getting covered head to toe in some sort of gooey substance. And I've done it. I'm not completely unwilling to do it, but oh, do I hate doing it. I'm just going to be honest. It's not that it's not fun while you're having it, but the cleanup is such a pain. So I'll do it, but I'm always like, it's not my favorite, and for one thing, it's like sometimes I feel like, well, I have to kind of weigh the factors. I'm like, well, is the money I'm going to make for this worth the 3 hours that I'm going to be scrubbing this out of the grout in the shower later? So that's one of those things. There's certain things that are kind of like basic, like certain bodily fluids I may or may not be comfortable with exploring, but I think that's kind of standard amongst most models. Say like, scat, for example, that's, okay, that's kind of a no. So as far as things that are too weird, it's kind of like when I see it, I'll be like, okay, that's too weird for me. But I've done things like vor. Have you heard of vor? Well, just for the sake of discussion, vor is a fetish in which models get eaten by another model. Sometimes it could be like a monster, or sometimes it could be sort of shot POV where the model is eating like the camera, and pretending the camera is a person. And I mean, obviously nobody really gets eaten in this, it's all a movie, it's all for show. And like, that's something that, I have done rather frequently. So I think all about your weirdness is kind of perspective. I've shot one of my more esoteric fetishes is seatbelt fetish. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It's girls sitting in the car with a seatbelt strapped across and talking about the seatbelt. Well, I do this and it sells, and I mean, it's not particularly difficult to do, but I had a couple of models who were like, oh no, that's too weird, I can't do that. But they'll have shoots where they're getting like spanked and bruised and beaten, and I do that too, but yet they think that, oh no, that's too weird, we can't do that. So it's all about a matter of perspective, and I would like to think that, 4 years in, what I would have found weird before, I probably don't find as weird today. So maybe I'm desensitized from the weirdness I've done. So
when it comes to customers that are requesting these fetishes, are you ever shocked by who it is? Like these old men in their 90s, or these really young guys that don't have much sexual experience that are asking for really off-the-wall stuff?
Well, it's hard because, like, I personally don't get to meet most of these people or see them in person to really know anything about who they are as individuals. They might, on webcam or during a phone call, tell me a little bit about themselves and their personal lives. But that doesn't really give me too much insight into who they are. Every now and then, I do actually get to see one of these people. They'll send me a picture of themselves or whatnot. And I'm always kind of surprised. I'm like, oh, well, that's what they look like, not what I expected. You know, I'll see like these guys that might on the internet portray themselves to be very dominant and masculine. And then I see them and, you know, they just kind of look like every other guy. They're not particularly tall. Then I'll have these guys that want to be submissive to me. And they, you know, are very, very submissive, very subordinate. And you'd think that they were like these little tiny shrimpy guys, and you see them, they're like, you know, pumped up guys, and I'm like, well, okay. There's not a particular pattern to it, you know, or rhyme or reason. It's just, but I can't say I've been really shocked yet to find what people, you know, the person behind the camera, but maybe a little bit surprised.
Is performing and creating videos an empowering experience?
Oh, absolutely. It's really great to be able to put your work out into the world and see people appreciating it by purchasing it, by emailing you to tell you how much you liked it. And it's really nice to, you know, to be able to make a living off of that, to say that I did this. I'm not making money for somebody else. I'm making money for me. I'm doing it with things that I kind of like. Now, you know, sometimes I make clips that they may not be something that I really am really excited about, but, you know, I know that people are going to like them and they'll pay the bills. And we all do stuff like that. You know, I mean, do we think every artist who designs for Pier 1 is really passionate about the vase, about every last vase that they design? You know, probably not. But it's nice to know that I'm able to create something and actually, you know, make a living off of it. You know, and sometimes like I'll wake up in the morning and I'll check my email and I've made money in my sleep. That's a great feeling. It's like, wow, you know, I mean, of course, yes, I would have put in the effort the day prior and posted and edited, but it's nice to wake up and to see extra money in your pocket that way. So it's empowering knowing that I'm not creating for somebody else, I'm creating for me. And even if it's not my fetish, I still have the ultimate say in how it's presented, how I edit it, how I portray myself to the world. And that's the great part about being independent too. I'm not, like I said, I'm not represented by anybody. I just do my own booking, I shoot my own clips, I edit them, and so I ultimately have the final say in how my image is projected.
Oh, what are the challenges working in the adult entertainment industry?
Well, you know, we did talk about the stigma. You know, there is that. That's something that you're always going to deal with. But I will say the longer I'm in it, the less it bothers me. You know, before it might have been kind of horrifying for people to find out what I did. Now I'm just kind of like, okay, another one, you know. But most of my family knows it's not a big deal. Most of my, you know, non-porn friends know, not a problem. But I think the biggest thing for me is that while it is very empowering to work for yourself, it can be a little scary. You don't have that steady paycheck. You can't, like, the amount of hours you put into it do not automatically equal a set number of pay. So it can be scary. Then when you have like your good weeks, it's great, you know, but then you have your bad weeks and it's not so great. And which is the importance of having multiple revenue streams. That's why I don't just do clips. It's why I don't just do phone sex. It's why I don't just book with other people. It's why I don't just do cam work. It's why I do all of them. So hopefully when one is up, the other one, you know, one's down, the other one's up, and vice versa. So I'm always getting money from somewhere. So that is a big challenge in the industry. I think also learning what your limits are too. And I found that the longer I'm in the industry, the less limits I do have, but we'll always have a few. But sometimes there's things that you do and you're in the middle of a shoot and you're like, you know, and something happens and you're like, ooh, you know, I don't think I really like that. And, you know, you learn, you're like, okay, I don't do that. I'm not going to do that anymore. I think it's also learning on who you can rely on in the industry. There's always people that want to take advantage of you. I've been very fortunate. Most of the people I've worked with have been lovely. I've had great producers. I can't really think of too many that have been bad, but every now and then I get some that they, you know, it's very clear that their intent is not particularly honest. One big thing I say to girls, like, okay, if you are working with a producer, you don't really know the guy, you don't really know anything about him, and you don't have any other models that can vouch for him, bring a chaperone. Ask if you can bring a chaperone. If the guy says no, then he probably is up to no good, and don't work with him. And, they'll try to give some excuse. Oh, well, I've had a bad experience. I'm like, well, so have I. It's like, and I'm sure that my bad experience is pretty scary too, buddy, So you have to rely a lot on your gut. And, if something seems wrong, there's a good chance it is. So rely on that. And I think also is the fact that, doing what we do, we are kind of in the public eye. Maybe not in the mainstream public eye, but people see what we do. And you have to be kind of careful what you put out there, that it does come back around to you. And people can misinterpret that and say things and spread rumors, things that aren't really true. So you do have to be careful what you put out there. And that includes our non-porn selves. Ami Mercury is not my real name. And we do have to be very careful to protect our identities. And every now and then it happens. We're in the digital age. Social media connects us all. There's certain things we just can't quite control. We can be as careful as possible, but every now and then something slips through the cracks. And every now and then I've had, not too often, but every now and then I've had a fan go, "Hey, I found your Facebook." I'm like, that's not a good thing. Maybe it is for you, but it's not a good thing for me. It happens. So we have to protect our identities every now and then. Most of the time it's cool, and and the guys that have found me, they're like, "Oh, hey, I just happened to stumble across you," and they did not even think that it might be kind of weird for me, but they weren't crazy, they weren't creepy, they weren't out to stalk me. But that can happen. So you have to protect yourself. So those are some of that's kind of my equivalent of the, daily commute to work, my challenges, the things that, other people deal with. These are my, daily complications.
Do you feel that working in the industry has changed you as a person, or at your core, do you still feel that you're the same person you were before you started?
Well, I think that deep down we all have our core of who we are. But absolutely, I do think that working in the industry has changed me, but certainly in a very positive light. I am much stronger and much more confident than I used to be before. When I first started in the industry, the first time someone called me fat, I was devastated. I thought the world was going to end. And then now I'm just like, really? That's the best you got? You really think that? Or when the first time someone called me a slut, I'm like, 4 years in, I'm like, oh, that's original. You're going to call a sex worker a slut. Ooh, she's never heard that one before. So, I'm certainly much more immune to the criticism. And that goes to not just in dealing with porn, it's in dealing with people on the internet, it's dealing with people in your everyday life that can just be unkind for no particular reason. And I'm much stronger than I didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit before. I was always taught that you just have your 9 to 5 and you do that job and you work for the man and then you retire. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's something fun about being able to work for yourself. There's something very freeing about that too, that I'm not relying on budget cuts. Because I know what it's like to have been laid off from a job due to corporate downsizing and the powerlessness of that. And sure, when I'm having a bad day and I'm not getting any calls or I'm not getting in sales, that can be kind of scary, and that can kind of hurt my spirit a little bit too. But ultimately it is empowering knowing that it's up to me to make these decisions. It's not up to some corporate person that I will never meet, telling me what my future is going to be because they decided that, well, we're going to do some budget cuts this month. So, that's that's where that's at.
What is the favorite thing that you've shot?
Favorite thing that I have shot? Well, I have a side project. It's a webcomic. sort of a fantasy and sort of BDSM kind of kinky themed storyline called Orc Girl. And I personally love orcs. I love fantasy stories, and when I personally watch porn, that's kind of the things that I look for. So I wanted to do something that I thought was kind of hot. So I made a video, and it's not necessarily based on Orc Girl, but I am taking from that sort of orc and fantasy themed. And there's a company called Bad Dragon that makes fantasy themed dildos. And interpret that as you will, dragons, griffins, and including an orc one. So of course I had to have this one, and I took that and I made it sort of POV style, like that the camera is the orc, if you will, and you could see the green dildo, and I played like an elf that had to surrender herself to an orc king. And I was really proud of how it turned out. The angles were good. It had kind of a little storyline, and it turned out good. It was one of my more I would say one of my more artistic works. And it actually did sell well enough too. At first it didn't sell, and I was like, no, I worked so hard, and I was heartbroken, and then eventually it did sell, and I was like, okay, I had to, kind of break the ice, get people a little bit used to the idea of like, well, it's, I'm having sex with an orc, kind of, I guess that maybe took people for kind of a loop, but that's been one of my favorite shoots, hands down.
What would you say to people that think they might be interested in getting into the adult entertainment industry?
Well, once again, there's nothing in the world that can really prepare you for what this industry is like. But that could be said about anything. That could be said about working in Hollywood. That could be said about working in medicine. I mean, any industry is like that. The only difference is that sex work has its specific little stigmas associated with it. But, keep in mind that it is sex work. And, keep in mind that it might take a while. Like, a lot of times you see in this industry, there's girls that start webcamming and then bam, overnight they're a success. And that's great. And I'm very happy for them, but that's not the case with everyone. Some of us, it takes a while, and that's okay. So, my recommendation is don't give up. And don't try to define yourself as any one thing, like get your gimmick right off the bat. Let that come to you over time. As far as like your scene name, like your porn name, think about it. Take some time and really think about it. Now, mind you, Ami Mercury has worked for me. I'm pretty happy with it. But in looking back, I'm like, man, I really wish I'd taken the name Velma Dickley. That would have been so cool. But, I didn't think of it at the time. So, take some time, think about the name you want. And then take some time to figure out what your brand is. Don't try to define your brand right out of the water. I immediately like, I'm the nerd girl, and I did it, and I went, straight at it. And that's still who I am, obviously, but there's other elements to it as well. So take some time to expand and figure out who you are. And also have multiple revenue streams. Don't just rely on one thing. I said, because the more revenue streams you have, the more people are going to be able to spend money on you, because some people may not really be able to catch your cam show, but they still want to support you, so maybe they'll buy some clips. Some people are just too nervous to talk to you. Like even, on like a camera setting, or like in a webcam setting, they'd rather talk to you on the phone. Consider doing phone sex, consider doing sexting. So have multiple revenue streams, and when you do start doing clips, if that's the road you want to go down, start with one particular fetish. Start with one thing that or even if it's not a fetish, it could be something vanilla. It could be like you're really into doing kind of like you might really be into anal, you might really be into kind of like tease and denial, jerk off instruction, whatever have you. But pick one thing that you think is kind of hot. Because if you think it's kind of hot, it's going to come through in the video. And people who like that are going to be drawn to it more. And get really good at that. Don't try to do too many things at once, because it'll look kind of haphazard. Pick one thing and get really good at it, and then slowly start expanding and doing other things, doing other fetishes. And then it'll become easier each time you try to do some new type of fetish or new type of content. It will be that much easier for you to make it and get into the heads of the people that like it.
Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me on Twitter, Ami Mercury, all one word, and that's Amy with an I. You can find me on Clips for Sale. I have 2 different stores. One is called Amy's Kinky Castle. The other one is the Twisted Treehouse. You can find me on ManyVids, just under Ami Mercury. Same thing with I Want Clips. You can find me there. You can also find me on Tumblr. Same thing, Ami Mercury, all one word.
All right.
Oh, I should have mentioned my phone sex company too. Damn.
Hang on. Let me do, so I know where to cut it.
Should I start over?
No. You can just say and. We'll do it that way.
And you can also find me through my phone sex company, peplove.com. And check me out there as well, and give me a call if you like.